I said, "Why would we need a DNA test?" And stormed out of our living room, slamming the bedroom door so hard the picture frames rattled on the wall. Looking back now, from my car that doubles as my home, holding my crying 4-month-old while counting quarters for diapers, I can't believe how stupid I was. I'm Rowan, 29, and I destroyed my entire life because I couldn't face one simple truth. 3 years ago, I met Silas at a friend's housewarming party. He wasn't even my type, more clean-cut than the guys I usually went for, with a steady job in the building industry and this adorable habit of opening doors for me. After our third date, I knew he was husband material, stable, kind, and completely clueless about the other 3 guys I was seeing at the time. I never planned to be faithful, honestly. Men had always been like options on a menu to me, and I'd been sampling different dishes since high school. When Silas proposed 6 months later, I said yes immediately. My parents were thrilled, especially my dad, who had been on my case about settling down for years. If only he could see me now, living in my Honda Civic with his granddaughter, who he refuses to even look at. The wedding was perfect, and Silas's family welcomed me like the daughter they never had. His mom taught me how to make his favorite meals, and I played the role perfectly, the devoted wife who kept a spotless home and always looked put together. Behind the scenes, I was still meeting up with Julian from the office complex next to mine, Kaylin from the gym, and occasionally Garrett when he was in town for business. My girls, Brielle and Anya, knew everything, helping me keep my story straight and covering for me when needed. "Girl, you're playing life on expert mode." Brielle would laugh when I'd show up to brunch with stories about my latest hookup. I thought I was so clever, scheduling these meetups during my lunch break or when Silas worked late, always making sure to be home first with dinner ready. When I missed my period after 2 years of marriage, I panicked. Silas and I had been trying for a year, but I'd been careful with my other guys. Usually, looking at the calendar, I realized it could have been any of them. But what was I supposed to do? Tell Silas there was a chance it wasn't his? No way. So, I acted excited and surprised when the home test came back positive, watching his face light up as he spun me around our kitchen. For a moment, I even convinced myself it was definitely his. Everything was fine until Silas casually mentioned getting a prenatal DNA test at dinner one night. "Just to be safe," he said, not even looking up from his plate, like he was asking me to pass the salt. I nearly choked on my water. "Why would we need a DNA test?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Are you accusing me of something?" The look on his face was confusion, not suspicion, which only made me more defensive. I flipped out, saying he clearly didn't trust me, and storming away before he could respond. The next few weeks were tense. Silas became quieter, working later than usual and taking calls in another room. I caught him staring at me sometimes, with this sad, thoughtful expression that made my stomach knot up. But I convinced myself everything was fine. This was just pre-baby jitters. Meanwhile, I cut things off with Julian and Garrett but kept seeing Kaylin. There was something about him I couldn't give up, maybe his confidence, or the way he never asked questions about my life. At our 5-month celebration dinner with friends, someone brought up how common prenatal paternity tests were becoming. "It's just standard medical practice now," our friend's wife said, not realizing she'd stepped into a minefield. Silas stared at his plate, while I launched into a speech about trust and commitment. Across the table, I caught Anya giving me a strange look. Later, she asked why I was so defensive if I had nothing to hide. "You know why," I snapped, instantly regretting how guilty it made me sound. That night, Silas tried bringing up the test again. "It's not about trust, Rowan. It's about being thorough with medical information." But I shut him down immediately, accusing him of listening to other people instead of believing in us. He slept on the couch that night, and I told myself I'd won the argument. How was I supposed to know he was already putting the pieces together? How could I imagine that within 2 months, I'd lose everything, my husband, my home, my friends, even my own father's respect, all because I couldn't answer one simple question: why not just take the test if I had nothing to hide? 7 months pregnant and feeling like a beached whale, I was scrolling through Silas's phone while he was in the shower. Yeah, I know, a classic move from someone who has trust issues herself. But I wasn't expecting to find anything. Silas was the faithful one, right? Then I saw it. Text messages from someone named Paige, talking about her and the situation, and asking if he'd made a decision yet. My heart dropped. Was he cheating on me while I was carrying his baby? I confronted him the second he walked out of the bathroom, still dripping wet. Whose page? And what situation are you making decisions about? I demanded, waving his phone in his face. Silas didn't even flinch. He just wrapped a towel around his waist, sat down on our bed, and stared at me with these empty eyes I'd never seen before. Paige is my lawyer, he said quietly, and we need to talk. What happened next still plays in my head on repeat during those long nights in my car. Silas pulled out his own phone, not the one I'd been snooping through, and showed me screenshots. Dozens of them. Messages between me and Julian. Me and Kaylin. Even conversations with Brielle and Anya where I joked about not knowing who the father was. Someone had sent everything to him anonymously 3 weeks ago. It's not what it looks like. I started, but the words sounded pathetic even to me. Silas just kept scrolling through the evidence, his face completely blank. 7 years of friendship in college, and Kaylin sleeps with my wife behind my back, Silas finally said, his voice cracking slightly. Did you know we were friends? That we nearly beat the hell out of each other senior year and haven't spoken since? I felt like I'd been slapped. Kaylin and Silas knew each other. Kaylin had never mentioned it. Not once. I tried to process this new information while simultaneously coming up with a defense. It was just one time with Julian, I lied, focusing on the least damaging part. A stupid mistake. Whatever you think happened with Kaylin. Stop. Silas cut me off. Just stop. I'm not having an affair, Rowan. I've been talking to a lawyer and a private investigator. I've known something was off for weeks. Why do you think I wanted that DNA test? I started crying then, real tears mixing with the fake ones I'd turned on for effect. The walls were closing in. If he'd seen those messages, he knew everything. My perfectly managed double life was collapsing around me. I want a paternity test, Silas said calmly. Now. Not after the baby is born. And don't bother arguing this time. Fine, I snapped, desperate to salvage anything. Take your stupid test. But it's your baby, Silas. I know it is. Even as I said it, I was calculating whether Kaylin's or Julian's work schedules might have aligned with my fertile window. That night, Silas slept in the guest room. I frantically texted Kaylin, hoping he'd at least offer some support, only to discover he'd blocked me. Same with Garrett. Julian sent back a single message. My wife is reading these texts. Don't contact me again. When I called Anya in tears, she confessed she was the one who tipped off Silas. I couldn't keep covering for you, she said. It wasn't right. I was completely alone, something I hadn't experienced since middle school. No backup plan, no safety net of admirers to cushion my fall. Just me, my unborn child of uncertain paternity, and a husband who looked at me like I was a stranger he'd found in his home. The test was scheduled for the following week, and deep down, beyond all my denial and self-deception, I already knew what the results would show. The waiting room at the medical center felt like death row. Silas sat beside me, scrolling through work emails, maintaining at least 2 feet of space between us at all times. I kept trying to catch his eye, to share some moment of connection, but he was completely walled off. The nurse called my name with a smile that faded when she sensed the tension between us. This is a simple procedure, she explained as we followed her to an exam room. We'll take a blood sample from Mom and a cheek swab from Dad. Results usually come back in 3 to 5 business days. I lay back on the exam table, watching Silas's face as they drew my blood. He looked almost hopeful for a second, and I latched on to that. Maybe there was still a chance. Maybe he wanted this baby to be his as badly as I suddenly realized I did, too. It's going to be fine, I whispered as he sat stiffly for his cheek swab. He didn't respond. Those 5 days were the longest of my life. Silas moved most of his things to the guest room and came home late every night. I tried everything. Cooking his favorite meals, wearing the lingerie he liked, even crying and begging for another chance. Nothing penetrated his armor. One night, I heard him on the phone with someone, saying, "Her dad warned me, man. Right before the wedding. Said she had patterns with men I should know about." I thought he was just being overprotective. I froze outside the door, remembering that conversation with my father 3 years ago. He'd pulled Silas aside at our rehearsal dinner, and they'd had an intense discussion I couldn't hear. When I asked Silas about it later, he just said, Your dad wants me to take care of you. I thought it was sweet at the time. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. Silas was at work, and I answered his cell when I saw it was the medical center. The woman on the phone asked to speak with Mr. Hayes. "This is his wife," I said. "I can take a message." I'm sorry, but due to privacy regulations, I can only discuss these results with Mr. Hayes directly. I hung up and immediately called Silas. "The results are in," I said, trying to sound calm. They wouldn't tell me anything. 2 hours later, Silas walked through the door with a manila envelope. Without a word, he opened it at the kitchen counter and read the contents. I watched his shoulders sag, then stiffen. When he turned to face me, his eyes were red. "Not mine," he said flatly, sliding the paper across the counter. "Not even close." Something inside me broke. Not from the result deep down I'd known, but from the finality of it. The DNA test showed a 0% probability of paternity. No room for error, no chance of a mistake. Just cold, scientific proof that I'd been lying all along. "Silas, please," I started, reaching for him. "We can work through this. It was a mistake, but we can still be a family. You've loved this baby for 7 months already." "Stop!" His voice cut through the room. "I'm leaving. My lawyer will contact you about the divorce." "You can't just walk out on me," I screamed, panic rising. "Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do?" Silas paused at the door, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You should have thought about that before. Your dad was right about you." "Oh." He was gone within an hour, taking only essentials and leaving me in a house I suddenly realized was in his name only. I called Brielle in hysterics, but she sent me straight to voicemail. My mother answered her phone but went silent when I told her what had happened. "Your father and I need some time," she finally said. "This isn't a shock to him, Rowan. He's been waiting for this call for years." By evening, Silas's sister had posted about the situation on Facebook, not naming me directly but making it clear enough who she meant. "To the woman who betrayed my brother after he gave you everything. Karma always collects." The post had over 100 comments, many from mutual friends, expressing sympathy for Silas and shock at my behavior. In desperation, I texted Kaylin. "The baby might be yours." Silas left. "I need help." His response came hours later. "My wife is due in August. Leave us alone or I'll get a restraining order." His wife. Kaylin was married and expecting a baby. The humiliation burned even deeper. I hadn't just been cheating on Silas. I'd been the other woman in Kaylin's life too. The perfect life I'd built was gone, and I had absolutely nowhere to turn. 2 weeks after Silas left, I got divorce papers and a notice that I had 30 days to vacate the house. The settlement he offered covered 2 months' rent at a cheap apartment, nowhere near what I was used to, but I had no leverage to demand more. My job had already cut my hours because of complications with my pregnancy, and my bank account was dwindling fast. "You can stay with me until you figure things out," my sister, Leah, said when I called her crying. "But just until after the baby comes. Devin and I need our space." Devin was her boyfriend of 3 months, who already seemed annoyed by my presence before I even moved in. I packed up what I could fit in my car, leaving behind most of the furniture and housewares that I realized Silas had mostly paid for. As I drove away from the beautiful home we'd shared, I kept expecting to feel something profound regret. Maybe, or at least, sadness. Instead, I just felt numb, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. Leah's spare bedroom was tiny, barely fitting a twin bed and a small dresser. I tried to keep a low profile, staying in my room when Devin was home and helping with chores when he wasn't. But as my due date approached and my body swelled, even that became difficult. I overheard them arguing about me one night. "It's been almost 2 months, Devin hissed. "How long is she staying?" "Until the baby comes," Leah replied. "I can't just throw my sister out." "She did this to herself," Devin said. "Her husband wasn't even the first guy she cheated with, according to what you told me." I pressed my ear against the wall, heart racing. "I know," Leah sighed. "Rowan's always been like this. In high school, she was seeing 3 guys at once. In college, she stole my boyfriend. I'm helping her because she's my sister, but I'm not blind to who she is." Their words stung more than I wanted to admit. Had I always been this person? The one people helped out of obligation while talking about her behind her back? My water broke at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, a month before my due date. Leah drove me to the hospital in silence, her face tight with resentment at being pulled from bed. The delivery was long and painful, my daughter finally arriving after 18 hours of labor. When the nurse placed her on my chest, red-faced and wailing, I searched her features desperately for some sign of Silas, but all I could see was Kaylin in the shape of her eyes, the curve of her mouth. "What's her name?" the nurse asked, clipboard ready. "Nora," I replied, the name I'd chosen weeks ago. Silas had wanted to name her after his grandmother. I wondered if he even knew she'd been born. The hospital room remained painfully empty during my 2-day stay. No proud father, no flowers, no stream of visitors. My mother came once, held Nora briefly, and left after 20 minutes, explaining that Dad wasn't ready to meet his granddaughter yet. Leah visited daily, but spent most of her time on her phone. When we returned to her apartment, things deteriorated quickly. Nora cried constantly. I was exhausted and in pain, and Devin made no effort to hide his annoyance. "The walls in this place are paper thin," he complained after a particularly rough night. "I have work in the morning. Can't you take her for a drive or something?" 2 weeks after Nora's birth, Leah sat me down at her kitchen table. "This isn't working," she said bluntly. "Devin's threatening to move out, and I can't lose him too." "What are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew. "You need to find your own place. I can give you 2 weeks." I nodded, too tired to argue or beg. Where would I go? My final paycheck had barely covered Nora's diapers and formula. The settlement money was nearly gone. I'd sold my designer handbags and most of my jewelry already. I thought about calling my parents, but the memory of my father's words stopped me cold. I spent those 2 weeks applying for emergency assistance, temporary housing, anything I could find. Everything had waitlists or required documentation I didn't have. The few friends who still responded to my messages made vague promises to ask around, but never followed up. People who'd attended my baby shower, who'd known me for years, suddenly couldn't remember my number. On our last day at Leah's, I packed our few belongings into my Honda Civic. Some clothes, Nora's portable bassinet, a week's worth of diapers, and drove around town for hours, trying to figure out what to do next. Nora slept in her car seat, oblivious to our situation. How had I gone from having everything to this? From a beautiful home and loving husband to living in my car with a newborn, all my bridges thoroughly burned. That night, I parked behind a 24-hour supermarket where I'd seen other cars staying overnight. I reclined my seat slightly, one hand resting on Nora's car seat, and finally let myself cry. Not the manipulative tears I'd used so effectively throughout my life, but real, agonizing sobs that came from somewhere I'd never accessed before. 3 months of living in my car taught me things I never wanted to know, like which public bathrooms are best for washing up, which fast food places don't mind if you sit for hours with one small coffee, and how to change a diaper in a back seat during a rainstorm. I'd sold almost everything of value. My designer clothes, the pearl earrings Silas gave me for our anniversary, even my wedding ring. The money went to formula, diapers, and occasionally a cheap motel room when Nora or I got sick. I still couldn't believe this was my life. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of my reflection in a store window, hair unwashed, clothes wrinkled, dark circles under my eyes, and not recognize myself. Where was the woman who had 3 men texting her every day? The one who always looked perfect and had everything under control? It was during a particularly bad storm that I hit my absolute lowest point. Nora had been running a fever all day, crying nonstop. I'd spent our last $2 on children's Tylenol, leaving nothing for food or gas. As thunder crashed overhead and rain hammered my windshield, I made the decision I'd been avoiding for weeks. My parents' house looked exactly the same as it had growing up. Neat lawn, trimmed hedges, porch light always on. I sat in their driveway for almost 30 minutes, gathering courage before finally grabbing Nora and making a dash through the downpour to the front door. My mother's face when she opened the door still haunts me, a mixture of shock, pity, and resignation. "Oh, Rowan," she whispered, eyes moving from my dripping hair to Nora's flushed face. "Come inside." She took Nora immediately, checking her temperature and clucking with concern. 102. She needs a cool bath and some rest. My mother's nurse training kicked in, and for a moment, I felt a wave of relief so intense I nearly collapsed. Someone else was handling things. Someone else knew what to do. Your father's asleep? She said quietly. You can stay in your old room tonight. But she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. That night, I slept in a real bed for the first time in weeks, Nora finally peaceful beside me in an old bassinet my mother had dug out of the attic. The familiar surroundings of my childhood bedroom felt surreal. Cheerleading trophies still on the shelves, prom photos on the wall, evidence of a life that seemed to belong to someone else entirely. Morning came too quickly. I heard my father's heavy footsteps in the hallway, followed by my mother's hushed explanation of our presence. When I finally ventured downstairs, Nora in my arms, he was sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee, newspaper held up like a barrier. Dad? I started, not even sure what to say next. He lowered his paper slowly, his face hard as he looked at me but deliberately avoided looking at Nora. Your mother says the baby's sick. She's better now, I said. Her fever's down. He nodded stiffly. Good. That's good. An awkward silence stretched between us until my mother placed a mug of coffee in front of me. Sit down, Rowan. Eat something. I won. We managed a strained breakfast, my father asking pointed questions about my plans while never once acknowledging his granddaughter's presence. When Nora started fussing, I took her to the living room to feed her, giving my parents space to talk. Their hushed argument carried down the hallway. She's still our daughter, Richard. Oh, and she's still the same irresponsible girl who lied to that poor man for months, who might have trapped him with another man's child if he hadn't had the sense to ask for a test. She made mistakes. Mistakes? She destroyed a marriage, Helen. She's living in her car because of choices she made. And now she wants us to clean it up for her, like we always have. When I returned to the kitchen, my father looked at me directly for the first time. I warned Silas, you know. Before your wedding, I told him I'd seen how you operated since high school. Always multiple boys calling the house, always stories that didn't quite add up. He shook his head. He thought I was being an overprotective father. Thought you'd changed. I did change, I protested weakly. I loved Silas. No, my father said firmly. You loved what Silas provided. Security, stability, a nice house. If you'd loved him, you wouldn't have been sleeping with other men from day one. Dad, please. Why didn't you just take the test right away, Rowan? The question exploded from him, his hands flat on the table. If you truly believed the baby was his, why fight it? You know why. Because you knew. You knew there was a chance it wasn't his, and instead of being honest, you doubled down on the lie. His words hit me like physical blows because they contained something I'd been running from. The truth. I hadn't taken the test because deep down, I'd known what it would show. I'd gambled everything on maintaining the lie, and I'd lost everything as a result. You can stay tonight, my father said, standing up. For the baby's sake. But tomorrow, you need to figure something else out. I won't enable this anymore. That night, I sat in my old room, staring at Nora sleeping peacefully. She had a small birthmark on her shoulder I'd noticed weeks ago but had been trying not to think about, identical to one I'd seen on Kaylin during our time together. Undeniable proof. As if the DNA test hadn't been enough. I traced it gently with my finger, finally allowing myself to acknowledge the truth. Silas had been right to ask for that test, right to walk away. And I had no one to blame but myself. The universe works in weird ways sometimes. The day after leaving my parents' house, I was counting change in my car outside a discount store, trying to figure out if I had enough for diapers, when someone tapped on my window. I nearly jumped out of my skin, thinking it was security asking me to move along. Instead, it was Clara, a woman I'd worked with before my pregnancy. Rowan, is that you? She asked, peering into my car where Nora was sleeping in her car seat. I thought that was your Honda. I wanted to disappear. Clara wasn't a close friend, just someone I'd shared a break room with. But she knew enough about my life to recognize how far I'd fallen. To my surprise, there was no judgment in her eyes, just concern. Are you guys okay? She asked, glancing at Nora and back to me. I considered lying, putting on the everything's fine mask I'd worn my whole life. Instead, I broke down completely, telling her the unvarnished truth through hiccuping sobs. How I'd cheated on Silas, how I'd refused the DNA test, how I was now homeless with a 3-month-old baby. Clara listened quietly, then said something I never expected. I have a spare room. It's not much, but it's better than your car. You can stay until you get on your feet. I stared at her, waiting for the catch. Why would you help me? You barely know me. Arlie. Because someone helped me once, she said simply. When I was in a bad spot, sometimes you just need a chance to turn things around. Clara's spare room was tiny, with just enough space for a futon and Nora's portable crib, but it felt like a palace after months in my car. She helped me apply for assistance programs properly, making sure I had all the documentation and followed up consistently. 3 weeks later, I was approved for subsidized housing, a small, one-bedroom apartment in a complex that had seen better days, but it was clean and safe and ours. Around the same time, I found a part-time job at a cafe where the owner, a single mom herself, let me bring Nora during slower shifts. The pay was minimal, but it covered our basic needs. And being around people again, people who didn't know my history or judge me for it, helped me start rebuilding some sense of self-worth. I also started therapy through a community program, forcing myself to examine patterns I'd been running from my whole life. Why did I seek validation through men? Why did I value attention over genuine connection? Why did I treat people as disposable options? There were no easy answers, but asking the questions was a start. 6 months after hitting rock bottom, I saw Silas in town. He was at a cafe across the street with a pretty brunette, both of them laughing over coffee. My old instinct was to march over there, create a scene, try to make him feel jealous or guilty. Instead, I watched them for a moment, then turned and walked the other way. Later that week, I wrote him a letter, not asking for anything, just apologizing properly for the first time. I didn't expect a response and didn't get one, but it felt important to acknowledge the hurt I'd caused. My relationship with my family began to thaw gradually. My mother started visiting weekly, bringing home-cooked meals and slowly bonding with Nora. My father remained distant but occasionally asked about his granddaughter. Small steps, but meaningful ones. A year after that rainy night at my parents' house, things are still challenging but stable. Our apartment is small but homey. My job barely covers our expenses, but we get by. I'm still in therapy, still working on myself. I remain single by choice, focusing on Nora and building a foundation neither of us had before. Last week, I ran into Betrayal at the grocery store. She looked uncomfortable, seeing me, rushing through pleasantries before making an excuse to leave. Watching her hurry away, I realized I felt nothing. No desire to rekindle the friendship, no anger over her abandonment when things got tough. She belonged to a different version of me, one I'm not interested in being anymore. Sometimes at night, when Nora's asleep and the apartment is quiet, I think about everything I lost. The beautiful house, the comfortable lifestyle, the man who loved me despite my father's warnings. I think about how one simple choice, taking that DNA test when first asked, might have forced me to confront my behavior before it destroyed everything. Would I have changed? Would I have become a better person without hitting rock bottom first? I'll never know. What I do know is this. When Nora's older and asks about her father, I won't lie to her. I won't repeat the patterns that brought me here. And when she asks why we live so simply compared to her friends, I'll have to find a way to explain that sometimes. Losing everything is the only way to figure out what actually matters. I still catch myself thinking the DNA test results must have been wrong somehow, that Silas overreacted, that everyone abandoned me when I needed them most. Old habits die hard. But then I look at Nora's birthmark, identical to Kaylin's, and remember the chain of choices that led me here. I did this. Me. Not Silas, not my friends, not my family. My choices, my lies, my refusal to take responsibility until it was too late. And that's the hardest truth I've had to face. I said, why would we need a DNA test? And now I'm a homeless single mom, but for the first time in my life, I'm trying to be someone who deserves better than that. Not for Silas, not for my parents, but for Nora. And myself. It might be too late to fix the past, but it's never too late to change who you become next.